Early on, when I was a child, my grandmother told me that it was the Holy Spirit speaking to me. Back then, my voices were really positive. They were advice givers, and they usually gave me really good advice. It wasn't until I got older, after my son was born, that the voices were negative, they were distressing. They were telling me terrible things about myself.
When the first voices external to myself started, they were basically questioning me, and everything that they said was related to things that I was thinking and feeling about myself. So it was completely understandable. The scary part was that they were voices in my environment rather than my own inner voice.
When I was first hearing the voice, I believed it was my conscience, because I was told that your conscience talks to you, so I thought that was normal. And as I got older, about 16 or so, I realized it wasn't my conscience. Did not tell anybody that I heard a voice, and basically believed I was alone and that nobody else heard voices.
Hearing voices throughout my life has been an experience that I have lived with in silence for a great period of my life. And that was because I couldn't make sense of the voices in my head. I couldn't understand them, so I didn't think anybody else could.
In a culture like ours in the U.S., when people report unusual experiences like hearing voices or having visions, it's usually assumed to be the sign of a serious psychological problem. If the person is distressed by these experiences and goes to a psychiatrist, they're likely to get a diagnosis of schizophrenia. Doctors stress that voices or visions are hallucinations, that they're not real, and the best response is to take a medication to try to block them out. Here in the U.S., people are typically prescribed many different psychiatric drugs, often at the same time. They are urged to ignore their voices and to regard what they say as meaningless, like the random firing of brain circuits.
I got the message that because I heard voices, there was something wrong with me. It wasn't that there was something wrong with the people that were hurting me.
To tell me that what I was thinking or feeling, either like it wasn't real, or to ignore it, or it was almost sometimes like I felt like they were saying I was lying.
She said to me, what it means, Caroline, is that you have a neurodegenerative disease. If you don't take these medications, you're going to get sicker and sicker, and your brain is going to further degrade. It was really scary to hear that, but the truth was that my brain didn't degrade, and I'm actually feeling a lot more clear-headed without the use of the heavy neuroleptic drugs.
She wasn't ready for her close-up.
She, because I said I was hearing voices, thought I was suicidal and insisted that I be either commit myself or be committed to a psychiatric hospital for observation.
I can remember someone telling me, expect to be in and out of the hospital every year and be grateful for, these small periods of time when you're not institutionalized.
So when I was a kid, I would go out to the breakfast table and there would be my cereal bowl, and next to it there would be a plate of pills.
Always medication. If this one's not working, try another one. That's not working, we'll up the dose.
Really just this idea that the voices just needed to go away. That there was nothing positive that could come from them, that they weren't real, that they couldn't have a meaning that would be helpful to me in my life.
This assumption that voices are meaningless and pathological is common in the U.S., but in many other countries around the world, people are being offered a different perspective, called the hearing voices approach. It got its start when a Dutch psychiatrist named Marius Rom started listening to one of his patients, Patsy Haga, in a very different way from how he had been trained.
I was trained as a psychiatrist like still everybody is trained, and that means that hearing voices is a defect in somebody's brain.
I began to hear voices when I was about 8 years old, and that was the age on which I was severely burned.
Patsy heard voices that told her to kill herself. Rom felt that he had no choice but to hospitalize her. No treatment seemed to help. Then one day, in desperation, he decided to try something radically different. He got Patsy together with several other patients who also heard voices in the hope that they might understand her better than he did. To Rom's astonishment, this actually seemed to work. These patients opened up to one another in new ways, and knowing that they weren't alone made them feel less isolated and strange. Patsy had long insisted that what she needed was a focus on the voices themselves and a recognition that her experience was real. Rom's partner, Sandra Escher, who at the time was a science journalist, arranged for Marius and Patsy to appear together on a popular television talk show. Viewers were asked to call the station after the program if they had personal experience of voices. Within a few days, hundreds of people had called, many of whom were themselves voice hearers. Then, an astonishing fact emerged. More than a third of those who said they regularly heard voices had never had any connection to the mental health system. They hadn't seen psychiatrists or been given any kind of diagnosis. They were just living ordinary lives. Rom and Escher and their colleagues have now devoted more than 25 years to studying the differences between these two groups, the voice hearers who become psychiatric patients and those who don't. It turns out that the biggest difference has to do with how each group understands and copes with their voices. This work has inspired the development of the Hearing Voices Network, HVN. All over the world, voice hearers and their families, along with clinicians and mental health researchers, are working collaboratively to expand a network of peer support groups where people can gain a deeper understanding of their own experiences and learn to integrate them into a full life. This new approach contradicts a long-held assumption of Western psychiatry that talking about voices will make the person worse. Instead of seeing voices as a sign of illness or something that should simply be gotten rid of, hearing voices groups help people to uncover the meanings of these experiences and the contexts in which they are most likely to occur. As a result, many people learn to cope more effectively with their voices or stop hearing them entirely. These groups also welcome those who experience visions or other unusual states, not just voices per se.
I think every city should have voice hearing groups, number one, because it's something that people don't talk about. And psychiatrists don't deal with voices, number one, they just don't deal with that. But having an open space where you discuss your voices, how you feel, how they make you feel, and being able to talk about your voices, no matter how bad they are, because you got people there who understand what you're going through, and they can relate to this.
And really it was through working with the Hearing Voices Network that I learned how to have a relationship with my voices. I learned how to negotiate with them and to work with them to figure out why they said what they said, the way they said what they said, and to discover a meaning for the voices.
I learned more things that I never thought. I learned how to control my voice. I learned how to love myself.
By coming to the groups and being able to explore what my voices meant, the context of the distress things that had gone on in my life that both were and weren't related to my voices, I was able to renegotiate the power balance between my voices and I, and learn that really we were on the same side.
The first thing they asked me was, what happened to you? They didn't say what was wrong with you. It changed my total mindset about who I was. Because I was always told me I would never have a great job, I would never be a great dad.
There's plaques all through Canada with my family's name, all by different names. So cool. Yeah, it's cool. There's actually
When the voices started saying really mean and untrue things about me, I was able to say, wait, this isn't right. You know, it isn't true. And so as a result, I was able to stand up to them.
So when I first went to groups, I didn't say anything because I didn't trust anybody. So I was afraid to actually say what my experience was or what I was going through because I had gotten such unwanted results from doing that. So it took a while of listening and watching other people, and then when I could see that other people went through similar things and that they had figured out ways of navigating it, people were creating lives.
My life changed dramatically because the voices that used to taunt me all the time, used to beat me up, they don't do that anymore. Because the simple fact, I'm sharing my experience with other people, what I went through with my voice.
A big thing for me was knowing that I wasn't alone and not being judged. A place that I could talk freely, not worrying about, am I going to end up in the hospital?
It's given me clarity, that's given me more stability, more confidence. I was shy, now I can speak out loud. It's really given me back my sense of self.
I spent years, even decades, of trying to run away from distressing voices, and it just didn't work. Through hearing voices groups, I learned there can be a value to stopping, to quit trying to ignore, block, and run from distressing voices, and to instead face them. The groups helped me to realize that these negative voices were actually echoing messages from my childhood, and that was a really helpful thing to know. Over time, examining those messages and ultimately rejecting the beliefs they were based on was even more helpful.
Many people who participate in hearing voices groups have also been in traditional treatment groups run by mental health professionals. They often talk about the many ways in which these groups are different.
I remember the first time I came to a group and it was completely different from any sort of clinical group I had ever been to. We were having a dialogue, people genuinely liked each other, people were friends, and people shared experiences that were so deep and so beautiful, and also had very different frameworks for understanding them, but there was never anyone trying to put that framework on someone else.
I think that's another big thing with the group, is it's not a forced group. Everybody is there because they want to be there.
One of the things that I really appreciate about hearing voices groups is that when you come in, it's not like there are these people over here who are the helpers and who have completely recovered and who have all the information, and then these people over here who are the ones receiving help. It feels like sort of no matter where we are in our journeys, we're all working together to share stories and share strategies and collectively create the lives that we want to live.
One of the most important functions of hearing voices groups is that they provide an opportunity to share concrete strategies for coping with voices that are distressing. The assumption is that different strategies will work for different people, or even for the same person at different times. By taking a curious and non-judgmental attitude, the group allows participants to discover what works best for each of them personally.
What's worked well is to address them from a place of strength. But it's really hard to get things like strength, purpose, meaning, and connection from a prescription.
They gave me techniques, like if I hear my voices and I want to talk back to them, I shut my phone off totally. I walk down the street, it's like, no, argue with the person, but no one knows that I'm hearing voices. They think I'm having a conversation on the phone.
I dropped out of 4 colleges because of my voices. If I had voicing groups back then, maybe I have a degree by now. And that haunts me sometimes.
What I realized is that when I am hearing a voice that's telling me that I should die, it usually means that there is something in my life that needs to die. It's not that my literal heart needs to stop beating, but there's usually a role or a relationship or something I'm doing that needs to end so that I can go on living. And HVN has been an incredible resource for me in being able to understand the metaphor and deeper messages of voices. I think it's a lot easier to discover those things when you're feeling supported by a community and when you're doing it in conversation with people who also have the wisdom of, walking through darkness and struggle.
The Hearing Voices Network and its peer support groups have spread to 30 countries around the world and are beginning to make a real difference here in the U.S. There are now more than 100 in-person and online groups across the country, and trainings for new facilitators of these groups, who can be voice hearers, mental health professionals, family members, or peer advocates, are taking place in many locations. Even people who have been in the mental health system for years, who have been prescribed many different drugs or been hospitalized multiple times, are finding their lives significantly changed.
As a voice hearer, I was trying to find resources that could help me understand my experiences better. And so I went online and just started looking around and found the Hearing Voices Network, and was just overwhelmed and joyful, really, that there was such a thing.
The Hearing Voices Network has really made me feel a part of a community. What I find so welcoming about HVN is that I'm allowed to be a spiritual being and have a spiritual perspective on my voices.
Fire we got. All right, this is supposed to be.
I used to be someone that was afraid to leave my house. I used to be someone that, was afraid to take a chance. HVN has really taken me out of that isolated place. It's given me a sense of connection and hope.
Research is now underway to identify the key elements that make Hearing Voices groups so useful. One factor that seems especially important is that they allow each person to make sense of their experiences using a framework that fits their individual circumstances. The groups also help with specific strategies to cope with distress when it becomes overwhelming. Even people who have experienced significant trauma are living far richer lives as a result of their participation in these groups than what they or others had thought possible.
I wanted to share my story that recovery from extreme experiences, a real and substantial recovery is possible.
And now I get to fly all over the country, do all sorts of things that people thought I couldn't do. I can work full time. I'm creating a life that I want to live.
The biggest change I would have to say is that I have a greater sense of purpose. I have a stronger sense of community, because I know every Wednesday, from 6 to 7:30, there's a place I can go to where there's no judgment, where I'm going to be around like-minded people who have similar experiences, where I can share and they're going to share, even if there are some big emotions that happen in the meeting, you know, we still walk away from it feeling good about each other and about our experience there, and we go back out into the world and we're able to handle things.
There are a lot of different people who have different experiences. You know, for many people, being able to talk about what happened to a lot of us when we were children, or the various sensitivities we've had throughout our lives that we simply haven't understood, you know, to help place our experiences and our feelings of confusion and pain and anger, and also of difference, you know, just feeling different, and then finding an acceptance, you know, a kind of acceptance in an HVN support group.
In the process of trying to heal myself, I have been able to create a space where other people can be healed.
If you sit down with people and sit down and be curious about what they're going through, maybe you'll learn something. Go out there and listen to people. That's all I gotta say. Listen, be curious, and maybe we could change the world that way.